Welcome back to another Broken Podcast. I'm Nick Taylor. We have covered some really heavy topics over the last 3 months, but I realize that there's something pertinent that we haven't covered yet. Me. I figure if we're going to keep deep diving into some of the most intimate, vulnerable, and personal topics, you might want a little backstory of the guy that is with you along that road. I'll be 100% honest, opening up about myself is not an easy thing for me to do. But in all honesty, that is a demon that I need to face. And what better way to do it than to do it with you guys? Our lived experiences are part of what molds us into who we are and what we're passionate about. Whether those experiences are good or bad, they have lasting imprints that shape and guide us to become the person that we are. Maybe hearing my perspective on my own lived experiences will help you feel less alone. Maybe it will inspire change. Or maybe it'll just feel good to hear that the guy on the other side of the mic is just as human and flawed as you are. However it may help, let's go ahead and get into it. The 90s and early 2000s were something else. Those of us that grew up during that era, we have not only watched the world grow at a rapid pace, but we also watched the pace get increasingly faster over time, all while trying to keep up with it. My hometown is small, and I didn't even get to grow up in it. At just a few months old, we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where I did grow up. But during the summers, Thanksgivings, and Christmas break, we would find ourselves back here a lot, since this is where my extended family is. And that small town? It has always felt kind of like driving through a time capsule, almost as if you went back in time 20 years just by driving into it. I feel like that may have been part of the draw to move here 3 years ago, to feel like things are kind of simple again, and give my kids the closest thing I can to that blissful experience of those decades past. Childhood was actually pretty amazing for me. And in that aspect, I lucked out. Don't get me wrong, things happened, but it isn't where the majority of the issues I fight daily came from. I was the second oldest of 8 kids, so being one of the older of that many siblings is its own weight to bear. And my parents? Never got divorced, they are still together to this day. So yes, there were 10 of us living under one roof together. Just thinking about that logically for a second, that is 10 separate lives, 10 different perspectives, and 10 different personalities, all coexisting in the same space. So it was easy to feel overwhelmed, overstimulated, and even invisible at times, just because the dynamics of how many people were living together. Not due to anyone's deliberate actions, it was just part of it. Sometimes I felt invisible for a long time, unless I was in trouble. Was that true? When the aspect ratio of kids is 1 to 4, a lot of time has to be invested in taking care of whatever fire needs put out at that time. And as you can guess, with 8 kids, there are quite a few fires going on at once. I realized this though, so I would occasionally start a fire to get attention. A lot of us did this as kids, and sometimes looking back on it, we all criticize ourselves because the toxicity of that mindset. Here's something that you need to understand though. Your brain wasn't fully developed, and you were just trying to figure this life thing out. It wasn't done with the intent to do harm in the way that a narcissist would do so. Rather, you had an emotional need, and your brain saw a path towards that attention you desired, and so you were testing the waters to seek some fulfillment. That is one of the things about being a child. Attention just meant attention. Processing the difference between negative and positive attention is handled by your amygdala, which doesn't finish development until well into your early to mid 20s. We were kids. Don't hold any of that against yourself. I'm saying that as a gentle reminder for myself as well. As far back as I can remember, I was searching for love. Even in preschool, there was a girl I was bound and determined I was going to marry. I had long-term crushes as an elementary school kid, but my first girlfriend was in middle school. And from then on out, I just had to be in a relationship in order to feel valuable. It was a way for me to get the attention I craved without having to fight 7 other kids for it. So I naturally developed an unhealthy relationship with relationships. And gradually from 11 to 14, I started placing all my value and self worth into what my quote unquote girlfriends thought of me. That was kind of where the real damage started, which brings us to the trauma and the start of a downhill slope. It was the summer between 8th and ninth grade. We had just finished the middle school chapter of our lives and were about to start the final chapter before adulthood, high school. I was excited about it. For some dumb reason, I spent my entire childhood wanting to grow up, and it felt like I was stepping into the final phase before I could actually be one. I had started dating Anna midway through 8th grade, and we were inseparable to an unhealthy level. There was an expectation to be together constantly, and if we weren't together, we had to be on the phone. It was a toxic teen relationship, and I can acknowledge now that it wasn't good for either of us. But I thought it was love. I was convinced that we were going to get married, and so was she. But the toxic level of inseparability continued to grow into not just the waking hours, but through the night as well. Things began to feel less mutual and more required over time. I was a pushover though, because I had fallen in love with the idea of love, so I would do anything to hold on to a relationship. I began being submissive to any and all requests of me. There was pretty much nothing that Anna could want from me that I wouldn't do. Sneaking out, stealing things, lying, whatever to keep her, I would do it. It was like the switch flipped for her the day that she realized that I was at her beck and call. She would even intentionally make me jealous sometimes before requesting something of me, and it would make me go above and beyond to appease her. I was more than wrapped. I was in kind of a state of servitude, as if my only purpose in life was to do and be what Anna wanted. And in turn, she would give me her full undivided attention. Unbeknownst to me at the time that was all that I wanted, attention, however I could get it. As you could figure, a 14-year-old boy acting as a puppet for a 14-year-old girl doesn't end well. I had given away total control to Anna. I'm not even sure she was aware how much so. When my own consent had come into question, I even caved in that way. I feared her. I am not going to sugarcoat that. So much so that even after my parents had found out I was sneaking out and they started setting the alarm system, I researched how to bypass the alarm sensors with magnets in order to sneak out and show up when I was supposed to. However, her grandfather eventually caught me, and he gave me the option of calling the cops or my parents. My dad picked me up that night. I was out of the high school that we were in within a week, and I never tried to sneak out again. We weren't supposed to see each other after that, but we continued to secretly at church, which was one of the only places I was permitted to go at this point. I was attending a mental health treatment / school kind of thing for the first part of my freshman year, and I was grounded to say the least after everything, and rightfully so. Eventually, the secret meetings at church started to die down. I began to start feeling as though I didn't have to stay trapped in this relationship anymore, and I started to move on. I was only 15 at this point, though. I had lost all my friends that I had known since kindergarten throughout that relationship, and the few that were still left, I had lost when I left our high school. The whole ordeal affected me at church as well, and I was treated differently there, even by the youth leaders after that. But I continued to move on, and eventually I did. When I was 16, I started seeing Shelby. We had met at church, so I'm sure you already know that this ends well. We were also toxic for each other. It was a drama-filled mess all the time. And once again, I found myself at the beck and call of a girl. She would belittle me and she would make me feel small, and I would invest everything I had into proving her wrong and making sure that I was good enough for her not to leave me. I changed everything about myself by the time I was 17 to try and fit the mold that she wanted. And when her taste became more expensive and my part-time job couldn't cover it, you know what I did next? I finished high school early online, and I made a fake ID making me 18 years of age. And then I got a full-time job at a coffee shop. If Shelby wanted something, it was understood that meant I was buying it. Dresses, purses, makeup, shoes, Literally anything and everything. She always wanted to eat out and to go on outings every single day. Every penny I made belonged to her, and she made me feel just that way. But it was never enough. She quickly decided I would never amount to anything after just a few months of full-time employment. I was destroyed. I had no idea how I was ever going to live up to the bar she set for me when it just kept getting raised higher. I mean, I was going to marry this girl. We had plans and everything. There was so much history and all the good memories that I clung so tightly to in order to overlook the mental and emotional abuse. But it wasn't enough yet. So at 17, I walked into a recruiting office, had my dad sign a waiver, and I joined the Army National Guard. That wasn't a decision influenced by anyone else, though. I had always wanted to serve my country, and this catalyst just accelerated the plan to do so. I was proud to tell Shelby what I had done, and I thought that it would prove to her that I was going to amount to something. That wasn't the case, though. She was far from happy. I continued to reassure her that this was going to be good for us until the day I left for basic training. At this point, the youth group was no longer receptive of me after joining the military, so the last inkling of what I could experience socially for what would have been my senior year was no longer accessible to me. And mind you, I was still 17, so for the remainder of my time before basic training, I was either at work with Shelby or shopping with Shelby. I missed my own graduation/send-off party to take Shelby out to buy a dress and go eat. That's how isolated in this toxic relationship we were. I left for basic training. While I was there, I wrote her a letter every single day, but nothing ever came in return. She finally answered the one phone call I got a week after a month of me being there. She had started dating someone else. I collapsed. What was I gonna do now? She had me convinced that no one else would ever want me, and I truly believed it. I kept writing her every day through the rest of basic training in hopes that she would change her mind so that I wouldn't be alone forever. But when I got my phone back at the end and I tried to call her, no answer, and I knew it was over then. Now see, this was in my teenage years. Both of these relationships created childhood trauma for me around relationships and sex, which I am still trying to work through today as a 32-year-old man. And I won't excuse any of my own toxic behavior in these relationships because it was there too. But all of this laid a really rough foundation of how I looked at relationships going into adulthood at 18. And I didn't know what to do or how to act, so I started mirroring behavior of older guys I knew in the military and innately became more toxic myself. After basic training and advanced individual training, I went back home a strapping 18-year-old killing machine, or so I thought. I began to overcompensate for my insecurities, especially my body dysmorphia. I kept working full-time at that same coffee shop that I faked my age to get a job at, and started trying to date again. I made the military my personality, something I look back grotesquely on today, but it worked sometimes, I guess? I had a few short-lived relationships, and then I met Kelly. She was a new employee at the coffee shop, the one my manager made sure to tell me was quote-unquote off limits a few days before she started. But then when I saw her, I knew I was in trouble. For the first bit, I was scared to talk to her because, she was off limits. But then my manager asked me to show her how to clean a bathroom one day, and the awkward situation sparked a friendship. Kelly was my best friend. But other than my manager, there were two things stopping me from pursuing her. I didn't think I was good enough for her, and she was a 21-year-old single mom of two. What interest would she have in an 18-year-old boy who is still trying to find a permanent place to live? We both were in relationships too, so neither of us crossed that line anyway, although both of us had mutual interest. A year goes by, our situations change, and we dated for a few weeks, got engaged, and were married 3 months later. We were babies, 19 and 22, about to start taking on the world together as Nick and Kelly. Me, Kelly, and the boys moved to Middle Tennessee right after the wedding. Our oldest was about to start kindergarten, and we wanted him in better schools than we grew up in. I had gotten a job in Nashville. I was going to provide for my family and give my wife the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom that she hasn't had. And life was just going to be happily ever after, or so I thought. But all the while, I was still chasing a deployment with the Army, volunteering for every single one that came up in the state. I felt like I had to do so in order to truly serve my country. Kelly and I immediately wanted to have a baby, and we were successful in that. Our third son was born 9 months after our wedding, around the time that I had finally gotten on with the unit that was deploying. I would have to leave her alone with a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a baby for long periods of time for training within the first year of our marriage. And before our baby had turned 1, I was off to war. Afghanistan was a uniquely individual experience for each soldier that was there with our unit. For some, it was a job on post, almost like a 9 to 5 routine. For others, it was almost a carefree party. I don't remember seeing those people do much. Although I wasn't around much myself, I was one of the people that volunteered to be out on every single mission I could get my hands on. Not just with my unit, but with all the units within the battalion. I was a gunner, providing convoy security as we ran around the southern region of Afghanistan collecting equipment to send home, as forward and command operating posts were being shut down all over the country. Some of us saw some things, and did some things, while we were there. It was war. It was about the survival not only of yourself, but everyone else. At the time in which I was over there, the goal was to handle things diplomatically without conflict. So in other words, if conflict found you, you needed to be able to hide it. I carried extra rounds, so I could always have enough to be counted back in when I returned to base. That was necessary after being threatened with Leavenworth if there was an incident. But even the time I did spend back on base, I spent as part of a security detail on base due to my security clearance, which meant something else dramatic that I couldn't talk about. Those people that were just working their normal jobs or living it up unsupervised somehow had no idea what the dangers around them were. They must have thought that we had been given a bullshit detail, probably as punishment or something. They didn't know about the Al-Qaeda member that had infiltrated the base to coordinate attacks, posing as a United States officer. They didn't respond to the attempts to breach our walls in the middle of the night either. Watching some of them, it seemed as if they were ignorant to what was around them. But those of us that were aware couldn't talk about it, unless it was in a security briefing. All we could do is exchange a nod of acknowledgement with each other, if that even happened. We just bottled it up, kept going, and kept busy. It made the time go by faster, and the faster that time went, the sooner we could leave this terrible place. Within the final weeks of our deployment, I received a Red Cross message. My wife had been attacked outside of our home. I had just come back in off mission, and in a whirlwind, I was on a plane headed back to the States. The first 12 hours got me to Kuwait, which then put me on an international flight from Dubai back to Atlanta. Within 36 hours, I had went from a combat zone to standing in Nashville International Airport. And the second I stepped off that plane, I went into a panic attack. All of a sudden, I was in the middle of a crowded terminal with people walking and running in every direction. I was unarmed. The security of having my rifle on me 24/7 had become what created my safe space. And being this vulnerable with so many people operating in a chaotic manner in which I couldn't monitor everything that was going on, it was way too much. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I found a wall and placed my back against it and refused to blink because I thought that split second that I had my eyes closed would be the end of my life. A Vietnam veteran found me and recognized what was happening to me. After he put his hand on my shoulder, I blacked out. I don't remember how I had gotten to the front of the airport or even calling my wife to come and get me. But I do remember that Vietnam vet sitting there with me for absolutely as long as he could before leaving me to wait for Kelly alone. I still remember his face, and to this day, I wish I could find him and thank him for what he did for me. The unit was supposed to have someone meet me there to retrieve me from the airport and bring me to her. That was what I was briefed, but that's not how it played out. With the time provided by the Red Cross, I immediately got to work on moving my family away from where the attack happened, and we successfully achieved that. Not incident-free, though. The toll of things that I had done, seen, and knew was too much for me to hold back. I was reactive, and I was able to recognize it. Not that that was hard. I mean, I made a manager of a Panera cry after they screwed up on my order and forgot my kids' food. I told him that if I sucked as bad as he did at his job, he wouldn't be able to sleep safely at night, and proceeded to tell him all the horrors of what terrorists would do to him. It did escalate more on his end before I resorted to that, but my response was way over the top. What I had been bottling up and holding back had become more than I could handle. Panera did comp our meal that day, though, and I haven't set foot in one since. I did have to make my way back to demobilize. It's a process every soldier has to go through when they come home. So once Kelly and the kids had been moved, I was whisked back to a base states away again. My unit was back stateside, on the same base, but because I had shown up on a different day and solo, I had to go through demob that way. I went to where 1st Army kept the onesie-twosies like me to go through that process. I had my own room for a few days, which was nice, but in the middle of the night, a few days in, 2 men came into my room. I grabbed the first one from behind and began choking him and put him between me and the other intruder. It was a newcomer I was choking, a fellow soldier, and the other was a 1st Army staff member. I had done this reactively as I came out of sleep. I wasn't really even awake until they were both trying to pull my arm off the soldier's neck and the staff member was yelling at me to stop. I had been faking my way through answering all the questions right until after that night. The next morning, I went to psych and told them that I was not okay, and I feared that it was possible that I could harm someone unintentionally, or even worse. I was no longer going to be going back home. I was then sent to treatment at another base. My stay at the Warrior Transition Unit lasted for 8 months. It was inpatient, but I did get to go home on the weekends. There were so many types of therapy, tools, resources, all at my disposal, and my job while I was there was to use those and work on recovering. I tried for a while, but I was homesick, and I'd already been away from my wife for a significant part of our marriage at that point. I just wanted to go home. So I started telling people what they wanted to hear in order to show the progress that I needed to. My story would probably be a lot different if I had taken advantage of therapy at that time. Honestly, I still kind of had the mindset that mental health wasn't really important at that point. So like a good soldier, I sucked it up, started flying straight, and got myself released back to my unit and was on my way back home. Little did I know that not only would things get worse from there, but they would stay worse for a long time. After that, I was masking and heavy. Thing is, when you are faking your whole life, it is going to show up somewhere. Usually that'll be the place where you feel the most safe. For me, that was happening at home. Because I was always angry and had to hide it all day, the pent-up anger ended up coming out on the ones I love. And with all the effort being put into masking my feelings all day, I would then come home and disassociate from all my feelings, good or bad. I'll be honest though, I had convinced myself that nothing was wrong for so long, I started to believe it. For 6 years I went on like this, which just made it worse with every passing day. There was a lot of pain, and since I never confronted it, that pain turned into resentment. Resentment of myself, my life, my situation, everything. Just a buildup of poorly placed negative emotion. So I did what any irrational, emotionally unavailable man would do when they feel like this, and I took it out on my family. It wasn't physical by any means, but that doesn't make it any less impactful. I only spoke out of frustration and belittled my wife and kids. I was a jerk. It was a coin toss when I was drinking in the evening, though. Some days I would end up happy and joking, although that was much fewer and farther between than the amplification of my negative emotions. As soon as I walked out my front door, though, that mask was right back on. And I fooled people. Hell, I fooled myself. What everyone saw was an active father and husband, and I would receive praise for that. And since the rest of the world didn't see anything wrong with me, and even praised who I was, why would I ever need to change? In 2022, we moved back to my hometown. It was a big move, states away. I was freshly out of the military after 12 years of service, and it was time for us to start a new chapter. When we visited the year before, we had started talking about it, and a full year later, it was a reality. I had a new job here, but had a month before I had to get started. So I had a little time to soak in the nostalgia of being in a place that always felt like home, where I had come so often during childhood. The extended family on both my mom and dad's side were here growing up, so a ton of my real childhood memories happened here. Moving to this place, I finally felt something for the first time in years. We had fun that month. We explored our new home, did some new and exciting things, and enjoyed the fact that for the first time in our marriage, we finally lived near some family. I kind of felt like myself again there for a minute. But the time came for me to start my new job, and I quickly fell back into the same patterns and routines as before. And with the new stressor of traveling 90% of the time when it was only supposed to be about 20 to 30, I began to regress faster and more than before. That job was short lived. I hated the travel. I had moved to my hometown to be there, but with that job, I never was. And on top of that, I never saw my family, which was the entire reason I had just left the military after 12 years. So I went back to doing the same job that I had before we moved. I had been with this company for the last 6 years of my civilian career, and even worked for them as a contractor for 2.5 years before the deployment when I first moved to Middle Tennessee. It was the job that sucked the life out of me, but I wasn't quite aware of that yet. After one long, boring month of doing training for a job that I had just done for the last half dozen years, I was finally going to get to live here during summer of 2023. Now that I was back with that company, I had taken on a lot more responsibility at work. My knowledge was extremely valuable as the company was hiring a lot more new people. I took on training the new guys, and I was teaching almost everyone how to work on the older technologies the company still had in use, because I was one of the only people around that had had first-hand experience working with those antiquated systems. I stood in for managers monitoring the safety of tasks where it was required. I even taught managers how to have their technicians code time correctly to boost their numbers by correctly reflecting their productivity each month. I was trying really hard to make myself irreplaceable while also showing that I was ready to take on more and move on to the next phase of my career, management. But here's the thing, with all that focus on work, I had nothing left to give at the end of the day. I had far less than before even. So when I got home, I would walk through the door as an empty shell. I started seeking help again from the VA fall of 2023. I had missed my intake appointment at the VA here while I was at that travel job. And as long as I was there, I couldn't really make any appointments with the VA. I never knew what part of the state I would be in from one day to the next. Up to this point in my life, my care through the VA had been inconsistent anyway. I prioritized work over my own care. What that eventually meant was missed appointments, and after many of those, you tend to fall out of the system with the VA. The calls start dwindling and then there's nothing. And each time that you show back up, it's kind of like starting that all over again. That happened multiple times between 2015 and 2023. And if there was ever a scheduling conflict, I would pick work over care. No one would know though, because I would mask for the whole world and everyone would see a carefully curated version of Nick that was appropriate for the situation. I was so good at doing it, I would even show up to customers' houses as a technician and give them a tailored version for their own experience. Maybe that's why I got such good customer surveys. It had to at least play a part in it. People want to see what they want to see. Since I was performing already, might as well make it count, right? Well, I didn't pay attention to how that affected me over time. I didn't notice that each time that I did that, I chipped away at my own personality even more, until there was nothing left. I was at my lowest. I saw myself as a workhorse for my family, nothing more and nothing less. It's a recipe for the perfect employee and the most absent, physically present man. Needless to say, I never got anywhere by trying that hard. But I don't think that would come as a shock to anyone who has ever worked for a major corporation. Things work off the good old boy system in corporate America. So a guy that moves in from out of state, even with vast knowledge and value, he hasn't been around long enough to know if he can fit in that system. I still tried though. I wanted to move up and move on with my career. I was planning on working for this company for the rest of my life until retirement, and I felt ready to move on to the next step. I was passionate about my job. In the grand scheme of things, I did love it. The actual work part, that is. The hardest part was the human element, dealing with irate people, disrespectful people, and people who saw your line of work as lower or lesser than them. Those people would act even worse than they do in public because they were comfortable where they were. I was in their house. I was on their turf. Not everyone was like that, though. There were more nice people than not. But the worst of events that took place at work was the last day that I worked there. That's a chapter I'll have to get into another day. I'm currently working through that portion of my life. What I can say is this, though. I had been putting in a lot of work to start healing from my past before this event. I had started confronting my issues in December of 2023 and had actively been working on it since then. I had realized the damage and was not only starting to heal from it, but I was making great progress. And one event, a very difficult and tragic event, sent me spiraling back down. It legitimately broke me. One day we'll be able to talk about it, but I still can't do that today. Over the course of last summer, I had a psychotic break, a suicide attempt, and a hospitalization, followed by 2 more phone calls to 988 Lifeline over the fall and winter. This was one of the worst and darkest periods I had ever experienced in my life. The difference is, I wasn't going into it emotionally numb this time, and I think that's why it affected me so intensely. I was experiencing my emotions again for the first time in years, and with everything surrounding me during that time, those emotions were dark and they were very harsh. See, over the course of time, I had come to think that my value was in how productive and profitable I was. And with something breaking me down to a barely functional level, I felt like I was no longer of value to this world. I was no longer of value to my family. My identity as a productive man was shattered. And what was I supposed to be if I wasn't that? The last year of my life has been one of the most challenging. My therapist labeled my activity as that of an agoraphobic. And even as I sit and talk to you, I'm still working through that today. My anxiety can be paralyzingly crippling at times, and the feeling of safety in public can feel impossible to come by. But I am working on it, and one day I may make as much progress there as I have with my inner self. I think the biggest takeaway I have over the last year is that healing isn't linear, and it isn't bound by time. One part of you may heal faster than another, but you can't rush the process without disrupting it entirely. You have to take your time and confront all your issues as you're able to comfortably and individually. And you have to do so without expectations or time constraints. If you expect that you're going to be better by this day and time, none of the work is going to be genuine. It'll all be forced to fit in that window, and therefore it won't invoke lasting change. Healing happens at its own pace, and you have to take it in as it comes. Since the beginning, I told you guys, I'm not a professional. I'm just a guy out here trying to navigate healing, just like you. I really hope sharing my story this week helps show that in perspective. One of my favorite things about this whole healing journey is that I get to help others by sharing it along the way. As a mental health advocate, I feel like confronting these topics as a conversation instead of as a fleeting thought is so necessary. The more we normalize talking about mental health, the less influence the current stigma around mental health has. And if sharing something that I learned about mental health helps even one person, then it is worth my time. Of course, I couldn't wrap my entire life up into one podcast episode, so this is just scratching the surface of my entire life story. I figured I'd share the most influential key moments that have had a lasting impact on my mental health, because maybe there is something in there that you can relate to, something that makes you feel less alone. None of us are. We have all been broken in our own ways, yes, but the feelings that come from that, those feelings are the same, and they are valid. Thank you for joining me today for this episode of Another Broken Podcast. I hope sharing some of my life with you has been helpful in some kind of way. Maybe it was relatable, maybe it was inspiring, or maybe it just helped you see that anyone can have the potential to change. In whatever way, I just appreciate you letting me share it with you. As always, I would love to hear from you. You can always email the podcast at brokenmedia1984@gmail.com. Find us on TikTok under the username Another Broken Dad, or just comment on this episode. I really hope that you have a great week ahead of you and that you can take the time to find the joy in the small things. Until next time, I'm Nick Taylor. Have a good one, guys.